So there used to be a time where Fords were affordable. I mean, Fords used to be easily in the early 1920s, 1900s, probably about $600 or the equivalent of $4,000 to $5,000 in today's money. Now, we all know about inflation. We all know how things have gotten increasingly expensive as wages continue to remain stagnant, which is a huge talking point that I always harp on. And the reality is we just are simply not paid enough. And that could be another video, but I digress. The thing to remember is that the landscape of automotive space is changing so rapidly. And now that we have decided collectively as Americans, unfortunately, to roll back the EV initiatives to change where we were going, the automotive landscape is absolutely going to change. But the thing that is not changing is the price tag. Now, remember that Ford at one point or another was considered a cheap value pack brand, which you could easily in the early 2000s get a Ford Escape, Ford Windstar, or even a Ford Taurus for less than $3,000. Well used with 100,000 miles. Now, those same cars would easily be $10,000 to $15,000, and the average American doesn't have that. But the thing that I really want to talk about is not so much the sedans, but now how Ford has become a premium brand that cosplays as a value pack brand. And in today's video, I want to talk about that. What's up, guys? My name is Chris, and welcome to The Breakdown, where we talk about everything cars, news, and reviews. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, as always, welcome back. So, I've been thinking, because I've had enough time to think, dear God, I realized that Ford is no longer the company that they used to be. Ford used to be that company we could all look to when we wanted a cheap, affordable car. And as affordability has become more of a crisis for more people, and I've talked about that in another video, that many people don't really have many brands to look for. And Ford, as one brand, as the Americans, has completely changed themselves from the time that they got rid of sedans to today with the rollback of EV initiatives. I really wanted to discuss a really pivotal point in which Ford has no longer become the brand we used to know, and I think that deserves some discussion. If that's something you're interested in, stick around and stay tuned, because you're now watching The Breakdown. All right, so I've got some notes, right? But I'm going to try to keep it as clean as possible. I don't have a lot of heavy data because I don't know if y'all appreciate that, which I've said that before, but that's besides the point. I think that Ford as a company back in its early heyday, especially in the early 1900s, it used to be about access. Mobility, especially during that time between Daimler, which would be Daimler-Benz, but it was just Daimler at the time, and a few other manufacturers along with General Motors, were focused exclusively on trying to create access for Americans, especially during the American Industrial Revolution, if you will, during the early 1900s. And one of the biggest points about Ford is not that they invented the automobile per se, but they refined and optimized the manufacturing process to be able to equally distribute and create more accessibility for Americans to be able to mobilize and move around throughout the United States. Now, as they become more of a global company, they also brought a lot of great things with them. One of them being the Thunderbird, the Mustang being an amazing cultural phenomenon, especially in the early 60s, and increasingly opening up the door for sporty performance and for affordability. It represented almost a coming of age for many young Americans to enter into their adult life, and it staples as a big moment for them to be able to take on the world. And so there were other big names like the Ford 500, of course, in the early 2000s, which is a retro name. And of course, you got things like the Taurus, you've got things like the Windstar, which of course, for you guys don't know. And the Ford company back in its early heyday, between the 50s and I would say the 90s is probably their golden days. Now, a Ford is very different and holds a very different nameplate. I don't want to start per se in the early 50s and 60s because it's a little too far back. We're going to scooch our way into the early 2000s. The 2000s was a crazy period and you had to be there. I mean, there was Ophides, there was Abercrombie & Fitch, there was the mall, which is a relic for many people. But more importantly, there was a definitive moment in which Ford became a very different type of brand. You see, before 2005 and before the Alan Mulally period, Ford was considered the throwaway brand. You got them because you know a lot of their products at one point or another, especially after the 80s, just a piece of shit. But as they took on a new CEO, they took on a lot of innovation, and they changed who they were. During this time, especially between 2005 and 2008, the housing crisis was looming and the people were not ready. And the one company that was ready was Ford. And even though Ford was properly ready, they, like many of the other manufacturers, had to take a small bailout. And for all of you who also didn't know, Tesla also had to take a bailout, so they were part of that group. But the thing to remember is that Ford was already projecting that they were going to go into a different direction. Also, in case you guys didn't know, 2007 and 2008 are very pivotal years for the automotive space because that is where a lot of technology took precedent. We got tighter fuel efficiency, stricter standards. More importantly, a lot of the design and compliance standards changed heavily. And so around that time, Ford was working on offsetting a lot of things. One of them getting rid of a few of their brands, being Jaguar, Land Rover, Mazda. Like they were tossing it out into the wind, babe. Everybody get out. But they maintained both their Ford and Lincoln brand and got rid of their Mercury when they had to offset a lot of assets to become the brand that they are today. The problem is that the brand that they are today is very different. So around 2018, Ford had announced that they would be getting rid of all of their sedans. And while investors absolutely love this, this was a huge problem for the average American person because sedans, unlike SUVs, don't require as much to produce and are a lot easier to produce even if they aren't the greatest thing. And the other thing to remember is that wages have not moved since the early 70s. And so now the ever increasingly problematic idea of wages increasing has become more of a labor. And now we need sedans more than ever. Now, the thing to remember is that Fords before, I would say, the COVID era were somewhat decently affordable as they were moving anywhere between 15 and 16 million units prior to, and then afterwards around 2024, they moved about 17 million units, which means that they haven't moved much. The problem is that now, because you've gotten rid of all of the affordable sedans, one of them being the Focus, and of course you've got the Fusion, which was a huge hit for the Ford lineup post 2008, because you got rid of all of those affordable options, it made it a lot harder for people to be able to access these vehicles. Now, being that the F-150 and the Mustang, two of Ford's most iconic vehicles next to the Thunderbird, it went platinum over here, babe. The Ford Mustang and F-150 are some of the truest staples for the Ford lineup. The problem is that the Ford Mustang is a coupe and isn't exactly practical for many Americans, while the F-150 is easily one of the most expensive vehicles in Ford's lineup next to the Explorer and the Expedition. Now, considering all things, Ford still makes an affordable vehicle, including the Maverick as well as the Escape. The problem is that they aren't exactly affordable when most car notes easily, especially at that price point, hit $500 to $600 per month, and for many Americans, that is a lot for a car note. The problem here is that they also don't offer exactly fun driving dynamics. They don't offer a lot of technology, and quite frankly, you lose a lot of money buying them brand new, but they still have high used car prices, which is a whole different video in itself. Now, I personally have seen a lot of Ford's mistakes going from the early 90s to the late 2000s up until now, and Ford has become a premium brand. Nobody wants to talk about that, but ever since we closed the loop between Mercury, Lincoln, and Ford has basically absorbed the both of them to create this basically super giant, which would be the Ford brand. Even Lincoln is struggling to find an identity, as most of them are now either made off in China or in Canada, as well as most of the Fords today are not necessarily made in America. And because we have expounded so much globally, because Ford, like many other manufacturers, is a global brand, it has also included a lot more pricing in the pricing.
You just made that up. No, I did not.
Now, the thing to remember is that getting rid of sedans at the time that they announced it made sense because the automotive market was going towards SUVs. And I know everybody is probably going to beat me up in the comments and say that we don't want SUVs, but the sales say otherwise. So argue with the numbers, not with me. At the time, it seemed brilliant. No other manufacturer had said we are going to exclusively go to SUVs when we initially sold sedans. And during the time of 2008 and 2018, a lot of offsetting was done by Ford, including selling off their premium brands such as Aston Martin, such as Land Rover, Jaguar, including Mazda, and also discontinuing Mercury, which a lot of people oftentimes forget. And Mercury was actually on its way up. I think I'm gonna do a video about that. Y'all let me know in the comments if y'all would like to see that. But the thing to remember is that Ford purged a lot of its offerings because they thought that it was easier to streamline and maintain profitability. And at the end of the day, it is always going to be about profitability over affordability. But as it stands today, now the Explorer is easily $50,000, the Expedition is easily $80,000, and now we have an even bigger problem, which is the rollback of EVs. Now, a lot of people will probably give me a lot of flack because they believe that EVs were not the way. We could argue back and forth about that, but the reality is that EVs has a market and there is a set of people who enjoy it. The problem is the EVs that were offered by Ford have always been upwards of $60,000. And unfortunately, many people simply can't afford that regardless of any type of incentives and tax credits, which, by the way, now that we are changing the landscape, we are rolling back our EV initiatives, which is going to completely transform basically everybody's investment. Ford lost over $20 billion in EV investments. And of course, they're not going to leave without a fight. And me and you are probably going to pay the piper for that. And so the reality is that as Ford has taken on the responsibility of trying to move EVs and then having that credit or those incentives snatched back, they've lost a lot of money. And all of those cars that I have named in recent days have been incredibly expensive. And Ford even went back and said at one point that they regret doing that, of getting rid of affordable sedans, because the market now needs them. Now, the point of this video is that Ford is a premium brand that doesn't understand it's a premium brand and has been marketing themselves as a non-premium brand, but has been charging premium brand pricing. And unfortunately, because Ford continues to not necessarily offer anything affordable, they're going to continue to struggle with the offerings that they have, because they're going to wonder why they're losing to the competition. Now, my observation is that in the next 24 months, we will see a very different Ford, and we will see a lot more things coming to the limelight. But I will say that as the company has lost a lot of money through EVs, we will see a different pace of direction. But what I really want Ford to get back to is affordability and accessibility. Make better products, and honestly, if we brought more manufacturing back to the United States here, we probably would see a lot more affordable things, but that's unlikely. That's just my 2-bit rant for today, but you guys let me know in the comments below how you feel about Ford's offerings today, and if they should basically go back to basics, because I think that's what we need. With that being said, thanks for sticking around, and until the next video, I will see you guys later.